What I'm here to talk about today is innovation and entrepreneurship and failure. But not failure from the standpoint of failing, but really, especially as we're here in the San Francisco Bay Area and in Silicon Valley, it's how do we use failure as a resource? How do we understand it better? How do we have a productive relationship with it? We do that a lot here, but we don't see a lot of that outside. So I wanted to spend some time on that today. And I'll talk a little bit about the course, the pioneering course I teach at Berkeley on that topic, and a book that's coming out in about 6 months on that topic as well. So let me ask, how many of you frequently have discussions in your companies about failure, failed projects? Good. How many of you personally start with personal failures when you meet somebody? There's a brave man right there. But I do too. Now, I'll tell you what was fascinating about writing this book. The people who were most willing to speak with us were the CEOs of Fortune 100 companies and other companies that had been fundamentally successful. And why was that? Because they were comfortable enough that they had failed some and they had succeeded some, and they had learned from those failures in order to empower those successes. And they saw in those failures the seeds of many of their successes. And that was the insight for us that said, okay, there's something that's a little bit deeper here than just a Silicon Valley, fail fast, fail often, fail forward, whatever. The other thing that's fascinating, not only if you're serious about innovation and entrepreneurship do you have to deal with failure, but one of the most insidious elements of failure, and we think about it in our careers, we think about it in public speaking, we think about it in so many of these elements, is the fear of failure. And it's that fear of failure, the what if it doesn't work out, more often than not, that keeps us from taking that extra step. It's what keeps organizations from taking that extra step. And we look at two types of failures. And again, I'll use our euphemism here. Buy the book and you'll see it in all of its glory. We have the foul-ups and we have the stuff happens kind of failures. The FU failures are the ones that you bring upon yourself. They're when you introduce a product or you do something that the market rejects. And then the SH failures are just when stuff happens, when the market shifts, when there's something that happens that's outside of your control. And what we've come to realize is that so much of what other people say are the SH types of failures actually are within their purview. So when you think about failure, how do, in your workplace, when something bad happens, how do people respond? They blame others. They deny that it happened. They'll rationalize, well, it happened for the following reasons, or they may even try and cover it up. Do those all feel about right as different reactions to failure, kind of natural responses? What's fascinating is that other disciplines study and they even embrace failure. They prepare for it, they incorporate it. I mean, think about engineering. This is a famous bridge collapse. It was a harmonic wave that went through the bridge as the winds went through. And engineers have learned from these types of failures so it doesn't happen again. There's a whole discipline around failure analysis. Science actually has a different way of looking at it. They don't call it failure, they call it a negative outcome. They have experiments with positive and negative outcomes. Now, science is the search for knowledge. So Edison, who founded General Electric, had a great quote. "I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that the light bulb won't work." Fortunately, Mr. Edison didn't stop. Do you all know WD-40? It's great, isn't it? Stops the squeaks and loosens stuck nuts and bolts. Well, it started out as WD-40 is water displacement formula number 40. So it started out as WD-1, and then WD-2, and then WD-3. And you can imagine where it went. What if they had stopped at 39? What they found was they were getting better every time until they found one that worked. So they used that process, not failures, but negative and positive outcomes. This is the Model T. We know Henry Ford's Model A, and we know the Model T. I won't go through the WD 1 through whatever, but what happened to B through S? There were a lot of models in between that didn't stick until he created the Model T. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. That was Henry Ford's famous line. So let me tell you a story about customer discovery here in Silicon Valley. Has anybody here heard of a product called Bourbon? So Bourbon was funded by some of the top venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, and it was a mobile application in the medium to early days of mobile apps around checking in, like Foursquare does, enabling you to check in. It had some games on it as well, and it had a nifty little photo feature on the side that helped connect some of these. And after a year and a half worth of work, Kevin Systrom, who was the founder of Bourbon, took this out to a number of his beta customers with his team, and they said, it's too complicated. We're not sure what it really is, but we love this little photo application here. So he completely scrapped the entire product except for the little photo application, and 30 days later, he launched Instagram, which soon thereafter, with a team of less than 20 people, Facebook bought for over $1 billion. He used, and we'll come back to this from the standpoint of failure, he used the failure of his product in certain areas and the feedback of his customers to identify a simpler product for which there was a great demand. And because people could understand it easily, in the first day, for example, that it was on Android, there were more than 1 million downloads. That same month, it started on the iPhone, that same month, he raised $50 million at a $500 million valuation. Later that same month, he got bought for $1 billion. So we should all have months like that. I was an executive at Sony and started up several businesses some time ago now, in the 1990s, and we built multi-$100 million businesses, not because I always had the authority, but because I acted entrepreneurially. I've also started up startups. I spun a business unit out of Sony and then operated in my own environment here in Silicon Valley, raised capital, and now that company is owned by Google. So this is our definition of entrepreneurship, which is taking those risks without having all of the resources. Now, you all visited Rocket Space earlier this week, is that right? So Duncan Logan, who's the founder and CEO, is a friend of mine. And one of the interesting things about Rocket Space, and I don't know if he shared or they shared this with you, is when he first opened that business, he had just failed in another business and was able to open Rocket Space without paying rent and without buying furniture. He had the landlord donate the first X number of months of the location, and he had furniture companies give him the furniture so that they could use it as a showplace for their most cutting-edge designs. So then he had a beautiful office, beautifully furnished, and companies came. And now he's created a very thriving business for startups and corporate innovation where he brings them together. That's thinking entrepreneurially as an example. Do me a favor and spend just a minute, and on the front of this, write out innovation and entrepreneurship. And in your words, can you write down 5, maybe 10 words, what each of those means to you? If somebody were to ask you to define innovation, to define entrepreneurship, what would that be? Does anybody have a definition that they would be willing to share? And by the way, as a professor, I am not shy about calling on people, even if they're no longer my students. I have you for the next 45 minutes. So what's a definition of innovation that you like? Do you have a definition of innovation?
I have one.
What is your definition of innovation?
To develop new things driven by your own spirit.
To develop new things driven by your own spirit. Excellent. Who has another definition of innovation? Sir.
New solutions to existing or new problems.
New solutions to existing or new problems. Excellent when we talk about new problems. How about you, sir?
Transferring business models from others to a different area.
Interesting. So now you're talking about business models, transferring business models from others to a new area. Do we have any more? One more. Yes?
Something that changes the way we think or behave.
That's fantastic. Something that changes the way we think or behave. All of these talk about a common theme of change, whether it's in products or business models or thinking, and the way that we also interact and experience. Here's a simple definition that I use. Something new or better, very consistent with a lot of what we talked about, that drives differentiation and creates measurable value. So if we think about innovation, doing something different in a better way and driving value, we're in business. Now, it doesn't always need to drive value, but driving that value. I mentioned I was an executive at Sony. One of the issues that we had, I took us online when it came to commerce 15 years ago. And one of the issues that we had was there wasn't a good commerce solution that met our needs. So I ended up building that commerce solution internally in-house with a team of contractors. And it was so good that not only did it work for Sony, but I had Hewlett-Packard come to me, I had BMW come to me and others and say, can we license your commerce solution, your payments platform, the ability to accept credit cards over the web, something we take for granted, was hard then. And Sony said no, but they were nice enough to give me the rights to this product for a perpetual license, and I spun that out of Sony and took that through funding and growth, and that's the piece of technology that now resides inside of Google. Scratch your own itch. Why? Because I knew there was a problem and there wasn't a solution that was out there. So I like to focus on that. I like to recommend that. But there's so many other places and ways when we look at trends, when we look at innovation, that give rise to new opportunities. And you see them every day. It can be new technologies. It can be trends in fashion. It can be weather or power or science when it comes to decoding the human genome. All of these may be areas where you interact and you see new opportunities. Changes in laws and regulation. Every time there's a problem, there's obviously an opportunity to create a new venture in that. And those are the areas, we look for those areas of change. One of the things that's fascinating about innovation is oftentimes we get it backwards. And we talk about the ovation. We talk about we love it. What a great idea. We always knew it would work. It redefined the marketplace. And the thing that's really fascinating is we understand it in retrospect. This is the opening of the Apple Store in Munich. We understand it in retrospect when we have a massive hit. But remember, Steve Jobs got fired from Apple. 5, 6 years before this store opened, maybe 7 or 8 years, Apple was trading at $2 a share. So we understand in retrospect some of that excitement, but in the heat of the moment, that's when the innovation needs to happen. Sometimes we just focus on the nova, the new. What's new and different and exciting, never before. And one of my favorite, another quote that I really love, and I'll explain more in just a second, goes like this. It's from the writer Isaac Asimov. He said, the most exciting expression in science is not eureka, I found it, but it's, that's funny. Now think about that, right? We've all had those moments. We go, that's fun. That's the third time that I've seen that this week. You start to see those patterns. I had that moment when I was at Sony. I was talking about this. I said, well, of course I can go out and buy an e-commerce solution. I'm Sony. I have a lot of money to spend, and I did. But I couldn't find one. So I kept saying, that's funny, and built one. Look for those opportunities where you have those internally. And for corporate entrepreneurs, for you to drive innovation inside your organization, that's frequently where those broader opportunities will take place. Now, once you have that great insight, this is what you might run into, the no part of innovation. Why change? What's working? Not now, maybe later. It seems a little bit too risky for us right now. I'm not sure I understand it. Or is this going to threaten our existing business model? You all know Kodak. What a lot of people don't realize, Kodak was one of the most admired companies in the world as late as the mid-1980s. And sometime right around then, they actually invented, a little before that, the digital camera. And you know what they did with it? They locked it up because it so threatened their existing business of selling inexpensive analog cameras, film, chemicals, and paper that they didn't want to let the genie out of the bag. They actually had the opportunity to fundamentally disrupt. They were founded with democratizing photography 100 years earlier. They had that opportunity, they put it in a drawer because it threatened their business model, and somebody else, a lot of other people, took advantage of that. So I don't know if you ever run into this where you're in the organization and you see innovation knocking and the organization says, no thank you. So the key thing is how to be entrepreneurial. This is where we talk about corporate entrepreneurship. How do you be entrepreneurial in making that business case? And finally, there's a lot of context. The in part of it is, when is it? Is it in the right time, in the right place, in the right market? Is it culturally as well? So here's an example that you may not know. Does anybody here know Pets.com? That was an American company in the early 2000s. It went public. It raised hundreds of millions of dollars. It was going to be the online marketplace for pet supplies and pet food. And they were very famous for this sock puppet and the Super Bowl ads that they ran. They went out of business. They were one of a number of early e-tailers that went out of business because everybody said, how stupid an idea is it to sell 40 pounds of dog food over the internet? So yesterday, I pulled this off Amazon. Let's see, 30 pounds of dog food over the internet, free delivery in 2 days. 10, 15 years later, context. So part of it is understanding, are you too early, are you too late, what makes sense? But most importantly, when it comes to innovation, it's the I, and in this case, the I is the you. I might surprise myself. I can try it. I can show others how to do it. And in particular, if I don't do it, who will do it? So many of you are here because you're innovators in your organization. And I would just encourage you to keep innovating, to keep working with others and encouraging them to do it as well. One of the most important things that we can do is not just as professors, as lecturers, as speakers, is not just say, here's some information, but hopefully share some thinking with you that will enable you to change what you do come Monday morning. Thanks.